It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Jerusalem. Our top story tonight. Iran's supreme leader defends attacks on Israel and tells its allies to prepare for action. Israel continues to hit Beirut as the world waits to see how it will retaliate after Tehran's ballistic missile strikes.
If I were in those shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
Also ahead on Sky News at 10, 2 police officers sacked over the stop and search of British athlete Bianca Williams win their jobs back on appeal. The government is accused of locking in fossil fuels for decades to come after pledging £21.7 billion over 25 years to boost the carbon capture industry. And an investigation into sexual harassment on board the UK's nuclear-armed submarines finds intolerable misogyny and bullying after a former naval officer tells Sky News she was sexually assaulted. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Hello and good evening from Jerusalem. Iran's allies must prepare for action. That was the message from the Iranian Supreme Leader today, who delivered a rare sermon at Friday prayers in Tehran. The speech, a call to the Muslim world to unite against what he claims is the main aggressor, Israel. Well, this evening, US President Joe Biden made an impromptu visit to the White House press briefing room, where he told reporters that Israel has every right to respond, but warned it should be careful to prevent civilian casualties. Israel's military has carried out more airstrikes on Lebanon's capital, following big explosions this time last night, which were reportedly targeting the man tipped to take over as the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Safiuddin. But his whereabouts are still unknown. We'll get more from Beirut in a moment, but first, Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports on the concerns about escalation in the region.
Iran has said it doesn't want to be dragged into a war, but its main proxy, Hezbollah, is under serious threat. Iranian intelligence has been infiltrated by Israel, and Tehran directly attacked its enemy only a few days ago. Today, the country's supreme leader gave a rare sermon at Friday prayers, calling for the Muslim world to unite against Israel.
Our resisting people in Lebanon and Palestine, you brave fighters, you loyal and patient people, these martyrdoms and the blood that was shed shouldn't shake your determination, but make you more persistent.
Iran, like the wider region, is now waiting for Israel's response to the ballistic missile attack. The supreme leader has warned Israel not to act. Israel doesn't seem to be deterred.
On the one hand, there is a sense of defiance, but I think there is also a deep concern in Tehran. Iran's method of seeking to deter its enemies in the Middle East has rested quite heavily on the proxies that it sponsors, of which Hezbollah was the leading and the most powerful, and yet that has been decapitated and degraded.
In an unscheduled statement to White House journalists, the US president warned Israel to think carefully about its next moves.
The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in those shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
This war is spreading. In the West Bank town of Tulkarm, 18 people were killed on Thursday night in an Israeli airstrike. The IDF said they hit the local Hamas commander. A cafe was also struck. Civilians were inside it.
There was intense movement of planes, most likely F-16 warplanes. The area below is the coffee shop, and up here is the family house. My brother-in-law, his wife, and 2 children were here, as was his brother-in-law. When the bombardment happened, it was unimaginable. It was like a lightning bolt. The destruction is obvious. Until now, we couldn't identify the body.
2 more Israeli soldiers were killed and 24 injured in a drone attack in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights today. The drone came from Iraq.
In a regional war against Israel, and Iran is trying to instruct the Shiite militias in order to create damage to Israel from the east.
Hezbollah fired missiles at the Israeli city of Haifa again today. Israel still insists that its invasion of southern Lebanon is confined to the border villages. But at the same time, it has ordered Lebanese living 20 kilometers away to evacuate. The IDF says its incursion is targeted and limited. But right now, this multi-front war feels anything but limited. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, let's take a closer look then at what is happening on the ground here and in the wider region. Over the last 24 hours, the Israeli Air Force has continued its aerial campaign, targeting what it says is Hezbollah infrastructure in Beirut. Dair, in southern Beirut, a Hezbollah stronghold, came under renewed Israeli airstrikes last night, with explosions heard near Beirut's international airport. The air raids targeted Hezbollah's Hashem Safieddin, the rumoured successor to Hassan Nasrallah, who was assassinated by Israel last week. His fate remains unknown. The Israeli military has ordered people living below the Awani River to evacuate and move north. Today, an Israeli strike on the southern town of Marjayoun struck around 5 metres from the entrance of the major hospital there, causing medical staff to evacuate. Israeli airstrikes also sealed off Lebanon's main border crossing with Syria, the Masnar Highway, a key humanitarian crossing. The IDF says it was being used to transport Hezbollah weaponry. The Lebanese government says more than 300,000 people have used the highway to flee Lebanon since Israel's assault began. In the occupied West Bank, an Israeli airstrike killed at least 18 people in the Tulkarm refugee camp. Israel says it killed a Hamas official. It is the deadliest Israeli strike on the West Bank since the war began. And in Gaza, the IDF says it's been conducting operations against Hamas fighters in the Netzarim corridor, which splits the north of the Strip from its south. While in Yemen, the Iran-backed Houthis said they had fired multiple drones at Tel Aviv. Today, US forces struck Houthi targets in the Yemeni cities of Sana'a and Hodeidah, while Iran-backed militia in Iraq struck the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights with a drone, killing 2 IDF soldiers. The so-called axis of resistance, the web of anti-Israel proxies across the region, is directed by Iran, where today Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, warned that Tehran was ready to strike back if Israel responds to Tuesday's unprecedented ballistic missile attack. Well, there have been reports of widespread panic as more than 1 million people flee their homes in Lebanon. Sky's international correspondent John Sparks reports now from there.
In Beirut, gleaming towers now compete with tents as tens of thousands sleep on the streets. Some are seeking shelter from the fighting in the south, others fleeing parts of their war-torn city. Here, Israeli airstrikes obliterate buildings in the southern suburbs. An attack, said Israeli sources, on the man thought likely to replace assassinated leader Hassan Nasrallah. Countless fires burnt through the night. And the bombardment has not stopped. We see local journalists, together with a group of first responders, come under attack. Come closer, come closer. They've hit us with a drone. Here, one person was killed, and dozens of other emergency workers have also lost their lives. To the east, the Israelis punctured the main road leading to the Syrian border. It says Hezbollah is using it to smuggle weapons. But it's also used by refugees seeking shelter from the war in Lebanon. And we see them trying to make the journey on foot. The majority, however, have elected to stay, and we found a nightclub in Beirut called Skin being rapidly converted into a displacement camp. The manager, Gwel Irani, is trying to make it all work.
Are you full now?
Yes, we are at full capacity.
How long did it take for the nightclub to fill up?
A couple of days. Couple of days, yeah.
Right,
we started with 70 people, and then 150, and then 350, until now. I'm sorry.
This moment of crisis has drawn the Iranians to Beirut, a rare visit amongst tight security by Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi. We saw him at the Lebanese speaker's house and followed the party into their meeting room, where not a sound was made, this an uncomfortable-looking meeting between key allies.
This is supposed to be a meeting between friends, but there are plenty of people in the Shia community in Lebanon who think Hezbollah has been doing the fighting while Iran sits on the sidelines. So it's not just a photo op, it's not just warm words.
In a few words to the media, the minister said he'd come to reassure the group they support and arm.
My presence in Beirut amid these difficult circumstances, while the city is being constantly bombed, is proof Iran stands, as it always has, next to Hezbollah.
Back at the converted nightclub, Ahmed contemplates his future. His house has been wrecked, but he still has his health and a portable speaker. The war has battered this colourful city, but its residents will find a way to survive. John Sparks, Sky News, Beirut.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Washington for us tonight. But first, let's go to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who is in northern Israel. And Deborah reports this evening that a hospital in Bint Jbeil on the Lebanese border has been hit by Israeli artillery.
Yeah, I don't have any details on that, but this is now nearly the fifth day since Israel confirmed officially that it's what it described as a limited ground incursion had started. And ever since then, we have seen increasing numbers of troops in the area around here, the persistent sound of artillery fire heading from northern Israel, where we are, across the border to Lebanon behind me. A helicopter gunship just opened fire a few minutes ago, and we've heard some loud explosions in the darkness over there behind me. And at the same time, the news that emerged today of how not just rocket fire from Lebanon coming into Israel, but also Israeli forces facing attacks from Iraq, presumably from Iranian-backed Shia militia in Iraq, killing 2 Israeli soldiers and about 20 others being injured. It really underlines the multi-dimension of the war, and also the fact that this axis of resistance, as it's called, is fighting back. We had news from the military just now that in the past day alone, some 220 rockets have been fired from Lebanon into Israel. That's after 230 were fired yesterday. Israel is backing on the belief that it has the momentum and it is going to be able to pursue this objective to change the balance of power in the region, backed by its chief supporter, the United States. But from what we're hearing in Iran and from its allies as well, that they are not going to be backing down, and there's clearly going to be escalation before this is resolved.
Deborah, thank you for that update. And to Mark, now a surprise, indeed novel appearance for Joe Biden in the West Wing press briefing room today, emphatic in how much he has helped Israel and how much the two nations are currently in contact with each other, Mark.
Yes, unprecedented. Joe Biden has never done a news conference in the briefing room here at the White House before. Many of his predecessors did quite regularly. He didn't. and he never really does many news conferences. But for actually domestic political reasons, good job numbers, he decided to come to the briefing room and do this statement and take questions. And he would have known that most of the questions, as they were about the Middle East. And yes, very interesting comments about Netanyahu, who he says he has not spoken to, but that he will. He said he's very clear that the American diplomats, the White House staff, senior staff who've been dealing with the crisis in the Middle East for a year now are in contact with their Israeli counterparts. I think what is interesting and what we've seen play out over the course of the past few days is President Biden very publicly saying what he thinks Israel should not do. 2 days ago, he was asked if Israel should strike Iran's nuclear sites, and he was emphatic, no, they should not. And today he was asked, should they strike Iran's oil facilities? Again, he said he would advise that they choose something else instead. So publicly, he is clearly trying to send messages to the Israelis about what they should and shouldn't strike. At the core of this is what Israel chooses to do, whether it chooses something which would clearly escalate and force an Iranian response, or choose something that will be more symbolic, that would hit Iran hard, but would allow both sides to save face. We have been here before, back in April, with the last Iranian strike on the Israelis. This feels altogether different, though, and as Deborah was saying, multi-dimensional as well, because while we're looking at this potential retaliation of the Israelis on Iran, Israel is also engaged in that war in Lebanon, and it is clear that that could spiral in many different directions. Still, the Lebanese army not involved at the moment, but there must be a point at which they feel they need to get involved in this. So many areas, and I haven't mentioned Gaza, which of course is ongoing.
Yes, we'll see what happens next, of course. Mark Stone, thank you very much indeed. Well, that is all for now from here in Jerusalem. We'll be back just before 10:30. For now, let's head to Gillian.
Anna, thank you. 2 former Metropolitan Police officers sacked over a stop and search involving British athlete Bianca Williams have been reinstated. Jonathan Clapham and Sam Franks won an appeal against a ruling claiming that they'd lied when they said they could smell cannabis during a stop and search of Miss Williams and her partner's car in 2020. Alice Porter reports.
It was this stop and search of 2 Olympic athletes which led to the dismissal of 2 Met police officers.
Madam, you're being detained for a search.
In 2020, police were patrolling West London because of an increase in violent crime in the area. They followed Ricardo dos Santos' car, leading to a chase. He and Bianca Williams were then searched while their baby was inside the car. No weapons or drugs were found. A disciplinary panel later concluded that 2 of the 4 officers lied about smelling cannabis when they pulled over the couple. That has now been overturned.
They did nothing wrong. They were simply doing the job. They were simply out there being good, hard-working, decent, honest officers, looking after the people of London, and they didn't deserve this.
Ricardo dos Santos has criticised the appeal decision. We are professional athletes. We pride ourselves on not doing drugs. The actions and allegations of the officers were completely unacceptable. We shall challenge today's outcome in the civil courts. This case has reignited debate over stop and search. Last year, police in England and Wales conducted around 547,000 stop and searches, but only 14% of them ended in arrest. Campaigners argue that the tactic is not effective in preventing crime.
The evidence is often lacking, which is why you find that the vast majority of stop and searches end in no further action taken. The reason why you have misconduct cases is because of the ways that officers approach people when they stop them, and it just so happens to be the case that black people disproportionately feel a lot more targeted.
Both officers will be reinstated and receive back pay. But the controversy over stop and search will continue. Alice Porter, Sky News.
It's touted as a critical step in reaching UK climate targets, capturing carbon and storing it underground so it doesn't add to our warming atmosphere. Today, the government announced £22 billion in funding for the technology, saying it can also reignite jobs in northern industrial heartlands. But green groups are sceptical, and a professor of mechanical engineering who spoke to Sky News described it as madness. Political correspondent Tamara Cohen reports.
Labour promised a clean energy future. The challenge, how to walk the line of protecting jobs. The Prime Minister and Chancellor, visiting a glass factory, think the answer lies in capturing carbon, stopping harmful emissions going into the atmosphere by stashing them deep underground. A £22 billion investment at 2 sites, which the Prime Minister says will help Britain get ahead of the game.
I've always believed that clean energy is a golden opportunity for our country, a chance to bring security and hope to working people. Politicians around the world are saying the same thing in northern France, in eastern Germany, in the Rust Belt of America. Their aspirations are the same as ours. This is a race, a global race to get ahead.
But the public have spent weeks being told about the black hole left by the Tories and painful spending cuts on the way.
Do you accept that that gloomy message risked putting off investors?
Anybody who's spoken to an investor in the last 5 or 10 years and asked that investor, what has put you off investing in Britain, will have had the same answer as I've had repeatedly until the election, which is it's the instability, it's the chaos, it's the ever-changing minister behind the desk, there's no long-term strategy, we're not putting our money in. So, yes, we've got to take difficult decisions in the budget, like, for example, the winter fuel payment. That is to stabilise the economy. Only by stabilising the economy can we attract the investment that we need.
The government have pinned their hopes and their chequebook on helping factories like this one store their carbon and cut their emissions. But some scientists and environmental campaigners worry this technology hasn't ever been made to work at scale and could tie the UK into using fossil fuels for decades to come. You've written to the Energy Secretary with your concerns. What are they?
It's damaging energy security. It's increasing costs because the cost of energy that comes out of these plants, these complicated plants, is much higher than the cost of energy that we have now. Why are we doing this? This is madness.
The Conservatives made a similar announcement last year, although Labour disregard it, saying the money wasn't there. It will be 4 years before we see results here. Labour are hoping time is on their side. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Cheshire.
The head of the Royal Navy has publicly apologised after a report into conduct on board Royal Navy submarines found evidence of misogyny, bullying and other forms of unacceptable behaviour. The inquiry was launched after former Lieutenant Sophie Brooks spoke to Sky News, revealing allegations of sexual harassment and physical abuse. Warning, this report from Sky's Sadia Chowdhury contains explicit descriptions of sexual harassment.
That I sort of woke up to was like a bit of a fumble that was going on as an officer senior to myself was trying to get into my bed and kissing me.
2 years after this interview with Sky News, the Ministry of Defence is making changes. Sophie Brooke, a former submariner, told us sexual harassment, assault and misogyny was commonplace in the Royal Navy's submarine service.
I'd said a number of times to various people, you know, I'd rather be dead than going on this patrol.
Today, the MOD admitted a problem. It said a report into Sophie's claims marks an inflection point for the Royal Navy.
My initial reaction is I am appreciative of the full and unreserved apology that the First Sea Lord has given me. That means a lot to have had that, both verbally and in a written letter, an acknowledgement of everything that had happened. And yeah, just I think relief that it's finally come to an end.
That's the investigation. But Sophie says the impact of her experience inside the Navy's submarines doesn't go away.
I was punched in the kidneys while I was on the periscope. I had someone licked my ear while I was again on the periscope. And then I had the same person also put their penis in my pocket whilst I was doing my job.
Today, the head of the Royal Navy issued an apology. He said, The investigation has confirmed misogyny, bullying and other unacceptable behaviours did occur during the investigation period, and this is intolerable. As the head of the Royal Navy today, I also offer a public apology both to Ms Brooke and to any personnel past or present that have been subject to any form of unacceptable behaviour during their time in service. I am truly sorry. Across the Royal Navy, the number of women who are serving remains low, and it's especially so in the submarine service, where women have only been allowed to serve since 2014. And Sky News understands that in the last 2 years alone, there have been more than 30 separate investigations into misogyny and sexual offences, and more than 20 individuals have been discharged as a result. Sophie says today's report and its recommendations cannot be a token gesture. She's watching for meaningful change. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News in London.
5 weeks after running for their lives from a fire that tore through their block of flats, residents have accused the building's manager and owner of abandoning them. The fire erupted during works to remove dangerous cladding from the East London building, which has been described as a death trap. When Sky News tracked down the management firm, they pointed the finger at the council. Our national correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
Come on. Kasia has lost everything, including now her patience.
They don't care. We nothing to them.
She's had 5 weeks now in a budget hotel since their nightmare at the end of August. The scaffolding was up around their building because the cladding was being removed. No fire alarms sounded, and one of their escape routes was padlocked shut.
It was death trap. It was absolute death trap. I think it was minutes, literally minutes, and it could have been really, really different story.
When you listen to Kasia or the other residents that we've spoken to, it's obvious how traumatised they all are. The council has stepped in to help them, but they're adamant that it's not their responsibility because this is a privately owned building. The council says it's down to the management company and the freeholder, who still haven't met the residents face to face.
David, hello there. My name's Tom from Sky News, sir. I want to ask you some questions about the Spectrum building and what's happened.
We are employed as a block manager to manage the common parts of the property, not the leasehold flats and not the tenants. We don't have a contract with them.
Are you satisfied that building was safe on that night before that fire broke out? Because we were told smoke alarms, fire alarms didn't sound.
I think that those are questions for the people that were involved in that process. The freeholder has the ultimate responsibility. It's his building.
Barking and Dagenham Council has had to find over £500,000 to support the residents. And so what of the freeholder, Irinium, the company that owns what's left of this building?
Hello. Is not available.
This is their director, Brajesh Patel, who just hasn't responded to us. For Kasia, the move to a new flat can't come soon enough. Right outside her window here, they've just put up scaffolding, as if she needed another reminder of this nightmare. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, East London.
Welcome back to Israel. As we've been reporting, this country is now fighting a war on several fronts. This time last night, we brought you the news of an airstrike by Israel on the Palestinian refugee camp at Tulkarm on the West Bank. Well, tonight, Hamas's armed wing has confirmed the death of one of its commanders, Zahi Yassaufi, along with 7 other fighters. The Israeli military said he was the head of the Hamas network in Tulkarm. The rare airstrike on the West Bank killed at least 18 in total. Well, meanwhile, the UK government is once again pressing British nationals to leave Lebanon. Just one further flight has been scheduled for this Sunday. A statement tonight from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, saying with demand falling for seats on planes and the security situation deteriorating, there is no guarantee that other options to leave will become available. The airport is near to where bombing has taken place in the capital. A final plea then, Gillian, from the Foreign Office office there for Britons to get out now. So from Jerusalem, let's go back to you.
Anna, thank you. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Spectator's political correspondent, James Heal, and the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the eye, its headline, UK warning to Israel, attack on Iran nuclear sites could drag region into war. Do stay with us, we'll be right back.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You are watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Iran's supreme leader has defended the attacks on Israel and told its allies to prepare for action. President Biden has held an impromptu press briefing saying that Israel has not yet decided how to respond to Iran's attack. And 2 police officers sacked over the stop and search of British athlete Bianca Williams have won their jobs back on appeal. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Spectator's political correspondent, James Heal, and the Daily Mirror columnist, Susie Boniface. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Eye hears that representatives from British intelligence agencies and the civil service have warned the Israeli government that attacking Iranian nuclear sites could lead the Middle East into all-out war. According to the Financial Times, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has adopted the mantra invest, invest, invest ahead of her maiden budget later this month. The Telegraph warns of a cabinet rebellion, revealing that David Lammy is leading the revolt over the Chancellor's plan to cut almost £2 billion from the budget. The Express has seen data suggesting that a quarter of elderly people missing out on winter fuel payments thanks to recent cuts are over 80. The Times understands the government is planning a revamp of employment law that would see workers gaining rights more quickly when they start a new job. In light of the decision to surrender the Chagos Islands, the Daily Mail reports that Argentina has vowed to make a fresh grab for the Falklands. The Mirror reports that TV presenter Nick Knowles, who's currently competing on Strictly Come Dancing, will miss this week's show because of an injury. And with the remnants of Hurricane Kirk about to hit the UK, The Star has some fun with Star Trek puns. Kirk, that's the pun. Captain Kirk. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by James Heal and Susie Boniface. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Financial Times front page. And the new mantra of the Chancellor, we're told, is invest, invest, invest. How so, James?
Well, this is all about setting the tone for the budget at the end of this month. And I think perhaps looking at some of the signals in terms of business confidence over the last couple of months, which have shown a bit of a downturn, the Chancellor has now got her message out there, which is that this budget is going to be about investment in the long-term future. And, of course, having said during the election campaign to the Financial Times, the same paper, that she would abide by the fiscal rules, this now seems to be about suggestion. Perhaps they're going to be looking at how they can kind of work around those rules in terms of getting the borrowing increased and maybe looking at tax rises as well to kind of pay for the investment in things like the green plans that Keir Starmer was talking about earlier today.
Definitely suggesting that she wants to ease borrowing rules.
Yeah, and it's the rules that's the big thing. So usually our current fiscal rules are such that the way that the OBR judges how much you're spending and how much you're getting back from it is that whether you see that return in the limit of a 5-year parliament. And it looks like here what Rachel Reeves is talking about is changing the rules so that you can judge investments over a longer period, and therefore perhaps you will have a greater profit from your investment that you make right now. So you can, let's say you invest £1 billion in GB Energy, and that if you don't get a return for that for 10 years, that sum is still going to end up as a positive, rather than if, say, in 5 years, if, say, it was going to be a loss. So they're actually talking about rewriting the rules to make investments something which the OBR is a bit more positive about, because at the moment, the OBR is very definitely, there's bits that it does wrong, and it says that if you're investing for the long term, it will kind of punish you for doing that. And so they're trying to change the rules. But there is going to be some sort of political criticism here that really, in opposition, Labour are very busy saying that the OBR, no, we're fiscally responsible and they're fiscally responsible and we're going to do exactly what the OBR say. And once they get into government, say, actually, we do need to actually change this and make it different. Where she is doing something very different is that Liz Truss, for example, wanted to do some of these things as well, wasn't even going to bother talking to the OBR, didn't have them even, their phone number, was blocking their calls, was spamming all their emails when they were trying to get in touch. They go, you're going to destroy the market. She was going, don't care. She wasn't bothered about changing the rules, she just wanted to do it. Whereas Rachel Reeves is thinking far more about changing, getting her head under the bonnet, changing some of the machinery so that it works a bit better for her. But it is a way, basically, of sort of just changing the budget headings to make it sound better.
And James, how revolutionary is it then, what she's proposing in the context of, as we've just heard, that Liz Truss was sort of thinking along similar lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rules are there to be rewritten in some senses, and I think we saw an early signal a few weeks ago when some of the high priests of Whitehall officialdom, like Sir Gus O'Donnell, former Cabinet Secretary, nicknamed God in Whitehall, was among the grandees who did write to the FT, pointing out that there was perhaps scope for these rules to be rewritten. I do think perhaps a lot of politicians and officials will acknowledge privately, and some publicly as well, that the danger is, as you say, Susie, that it deters long-term investment in the UK. And Keir Starmer has spoken a lot about the need to end sticking plaster politics, the fact that you were deterred from investing more than 5 years, the fact that we have not had long-term infrastructure projects in this country over the past 20 years does suggest there is a case for that. That said, of course, you also have very nervous investors. The gilt market is at the highest level since it was at the end of July. So Rachel Reeves is in a difficult position here, both in terms of financial concerns and what the market's thinking, and also political pressures as well. Having pledged one thing in the election campaign and now doing another in office, it'll be a difficult balancing act for her to pull off. And so I wonder perhaps how much of this is about briefing and kind of to test the waters, and actually it'll be a little less rewriting than we're led to believe.
And also how much reliable it's going to be. Once you start making 10, 15, 20-year predictions for your investments,
yeah,
there's going to be a lot of wars and events and pandemics that can come along and throw all of that out with the bath. So you're actually going to start having an OBR perhaps that's going to be looking more positively at the best possible outcome, and that maybe is the outcome no one ever actually gets to see. So does it actually fundamentally undermine the OBR?
And these talk about guardrails. I mean, does that just soothing talk? I mean,
what
how
does that mean?
Well, quite. I mean, I suspect it's much more about sort of mood music and ways in which to suggest that they're going to use this money properly with investment. But I suspect right now it's about trying some fiscal wiggle room. As you say, Susie, I mean, of course, we've seen over the past 5-10 years or so that very often government optimistic predictions turn out to be slightly undermined by reality.
And it's very much about setting expectations, isn't it? We've been hearing quite a lot of, you know, we're going to have to sort of gird our loins. It's going to be difficult, but we have to get through the difficult bits to get to the good bits.
But there's going to be an awful lot of what you just said. What does that mean? You know, because she's quoting you as saying, you know, there won't be a return to austerity, but yet we do know that she is talking about massive holes in the finances. She is asking departments to make cuts in their budget. And on the front of the Telegraph, this new phrase, spending efficiencies, is being wielded, which sounds an awful lot to me like austerity. Sorry, chaps. Maybe there's some other way that she's got tinkering with it to say there's going to be investments alongside it and we're not starving, you know, the state of the money that it needs. There's going to be some investment too. But, you know, if you're trying to get £1 billion out of education and £1 billion out of the health department, which is what it's talking about here, and if you're not having the spending on foreign aid, which is the thing that at the moment is supporting not only an awful lot of charity work around the world, but our housing of asylum seekers as well, then, I mean, where on earth are you going to get that money from? £1 billion out of the education budget is not something you'd get for just, you know, by being more careful with the paper clips.
And just to add, of course, I mean, you know, the budget is the end of this month. One of the reasons why I think this government has struggled to establish a narrative early on is because it made the decision, its original sin perhaps, to have a budget 4 months after its election. Most incoming chancellors, Geoffrey Howe in 1979, Gordon Brown in 1997, George Osborne in 2010, all did so within 2 months, so half the period.
You know, they were stopped by the summer break because Rishi called the election at just the right time.
But equally, OK, first of all, well, you can leave about the winter fuel, you know, allowance scrapping, for instance, but having it so late means we've had this kind of narrative gap in British politics, and now we're talking about the end of the budget. I think there's all eyes on that, and I think the danger perhaps is they haven't been able to set a narrative early on.
You mentioned foreign aid cuts. Let's move to the Telegraph. Describing it as something of a rebellion. Being headed by David Lammy, I think they're quoting, suggesting that he's really up in arms as to the amount that might be cut from the foreign aid budget.
Yeah, because the amount that we spend on foreign aid is something which an awful lot of the right-wing press get very upset about, but which, if you actually speak to voters, they do not want you to stop vaccinating children. They do not want the government to stop helping to dig people out of rubble after earthquakes. They don't want to stop having power and influence over governments in other parts of the world which you can use to seed and help and control and develop those states, and also perhaps have some influence on in continuing migration, which happens as a result of climate change and failed states and all these other things. If you stop being part of that, then you make the migration problems much, much worse. And if you talk to voters, they'll go, well, yes, obviously that is something we should probably be spending taxpayer money on, and it makes sense. But yet, that is one of the budgets that has been cut and cut and cut because the Conservative press and Conservative governments have said, this looks bad. We don't want to give money to other people. How dare we? We must spend on our own. And then what happens to it? A quarter of it is being spent on hotel owners. It's not being spent on the asylum seekers who are living 5 to a box room. It's going to the hotel owners who are charging through the nose for it because we got rid of all our social housing.
But isn't public perception, though, in general, that money should be spent at home first? Isn't that the kind of narrative that...
Of course, but I think what Susie's saying, I think actually, you know, a lot of Conservatives privately admit is that you spend pennies abroad to save pounds at home, which is that if you can try and stop issues like migration at source, rather than mean you then have to put up people in 4-star hotels at the UK taxpayer expense, that would be a better solution for all. So I think that it's one of those issues, when we talk about sort of short-term, the danger is that foreign aid in what we kind of talk about public perception is sometimes different from the reality of what's actually being spent. I mean, the Telegraph has splashed us with a headline about cabinet rebellion. I suspect, given the way in which the aid budget has been shrunk over the past decade, we're unlikely to see any kind of formal rebellion as such. I mean, I think it's striking, perhaps, that it's just described as the Foreign Secretary being out there on his own, rather than, say, the Home Secretary, who obviously would have responsibility for migration, joining on this one. But I do think this is going to be a foretaste of what's to come in the next 4 weeks as part of the spending review, part about government cuts, looking ahead to the budget at the end of this month. And it's notable, I think, that Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of Treasury, has been the one who's left to sort of front up these ministers and has the task, I'm sure, of becoming the most unpopular man in government by saying no to his colleagues on this.
The Telegraph, quoting a spokesman for the Foreign Office and Treasury, didn't dispute there was a standoff over aid spending. No comment was issued by either department.
Says a lot.
The Mail, the Chagos Islands that nobody'd ever heard of before. Yesterday, I suspect.
Unless you were a Chagosian Islander, in which...
Well, yes, and quite a lot of them here, actually.
Yeah.
It's now bringing forth the question as to whether questions over the Falklands, over Gibraltar, whether they also will be handed over.
Literally, there isn't any connection whatsoever, and there is no reason to ask this question, except that we have a Prime Minister who's not very nimble-footed when he's asked questions at press conferences, and he has a team around him who are not briefing him properly on what he can expect from the feral media, which is just about anything, especially this kind of question. And it's day one in PR school.
But also there's been a quote from the Argentinian foreign minister.
Yes, because that's exactly what happened. So what's happened is there's been a press conference. Keir Starmer was asked, you've given back Diego Garcia. You've given it to Mauritius, not given it back. You've given it to someone else entirely. You've kept this base. He wants to talk about the naval base and the deal that was done, and he thinks that's important. But someone has piped up, which should be PR School 101. What are you going to do with the Falklands then? You're giving that back too, which is a really obvious question. It's got nothing to do with this, but it's a really obvious, let's get the knife in kind of question. No one has put a line in the Prime Minister's head as to what to say if that comes up. And he hasn't got one. So he's just avoided the question and then wants to talk about what he wants to talk about. As a result, there's now a void where people are saying, hands off the Falklands, and start rattling the sabre again, and the Argentinians start getting antsy.
James, very quickly.
And of course, it was always going to give succour to, people who want territory elsewhere. They will obviously seize anything, and they see, unfortunately, reasoned negotiation as a weakness, and they want to exploit it. So, as you say, I agree completely. The Prime Minister had the obvious answer to this, not least because as soon as it was announced, the Argentinians started demanding it back.
What matters is the people who live on the Falklands have said repeatedly, and in Gibraltar, they want to be British, and that is the end of the debate. People have a right to self-determination.
That's quite different to those on the Chagos Islands, actually.
That's all he has to say in answer to that question.
Susie and James, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break, and Boris Johnson says he regrets apologising over Partygate. We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Independent United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, I don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, James and Susie. We're going to take a look at the front page of the Eye, and obviously much going on in the Middle East on various fronts. The UK warning Israel that they should not attack Iran's nuclear sites. We did have President Biden yesterday saying that perhaps they might attack oil reserves, which then peaked the price of oil across the world, but definitely all voices internationally are saying that nuclear sites should be out of bounds. But will Israel listen?
Well, I think this is the key contrast, really, in terms of restraint versus pressing home one's advantage. Obviously, the UK and the US tonight are talking about the importance of avoiding anything to do with nuclear sites and, of course, conventional weapons as well, because Iran has long-range capabilities which could strike at British bases in terms of Cyprus and the Gulf as well. But at the same time, of course, in Israel, they want to press home their advantage, having made so many intelligence gains in the region, both in terms of dealing with Hezbollah and also with Iran as well. So that's the key point about whether they believe retaliation is in order or whether they are going to listen to those kind of Western warnings amid talk perhaps about the US, for instance, pressing on with sanctions against Iran.
Susie, your best guess as to what happens next?
Well, it all comes down to target selection at this stage. Everyone knows that Israel is going to retaliate against Iran, and everyone knows if that happens, Iran's going to want to retaliate back. It matters what kind and what level of targets Israel selects, therefore which kind of targets Iran selects in return. Do you have the kind of targets which are going to de-escalate, which are perhaps a level below where you could be going in order to try and dial things back down? Or are people going to start ramping it up and go, do you know what, we're just going to go after your oil fields, we're going to do this, we're going to do your nuclear power stations? And this has got 3 former heads of Western intelligence agencies telling the Eye that they believe the current crisis increases the likelihood that Iran will hurry up to develop a nuclear bomb. Happy Friday night, everyone. But then you have the issue of how do you get UN inspectors in and to keep an eye on that. And, you know, if you don't have diplomacy, you can't do that. So if that's where things are going to be heading, to the point where you're going to want to start getting UN weapons inspectors in and just you've got to have diplomacy. And that should mean that this shuttling around we've got between the Western nations and Iran and Israel is going to try and get them to select targets which are down.
It does seem that we have gone past the point of diplomacy at the moment, but we shall see. And just very quickly, Boris Johnson's new book out. Apparently, the only thing he regrets is apologising for Partygate.
Talking of diplomacy, I'm not sure it's something that Mr Johnson could be necessarily accused of. Look, I was talking to someone earlier who described it as a young adult fiction, in the sense of both being not really particularly based in their own recollections of what was going on and also being a little bit boy's own. So I think I've read only the extracts thus far, but I'm not sure necessarily how many converts he's hoping to win over. Probably more speaking to the faithful and those who miss a bit of Mr Johnson, number 10.
Susie, one sentence.
I can't say it, it's too rude. OK. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping the language clean. Susie and James, thank you very much for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. It's set to gradually turn more unsettled from the west this weekend as low pressure moves in off the Atlantic. For much of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, it's a cloudy, windy and damp start to Saturday with heavy and persistent rain in the west. England and Wales will be dry and chilly with mist and fog patches. The overnight fog will lift and clear to leave pleasant sunny spells for much of England and Wales. However, it will be cloudy, windy and wet at times. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Iran's supreme leader warns Israel not to strike back. And President Biden says that Israel has not yet decided how to respond.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by